The fastest way to discover what people really think of you is to offer them something valuable and then watch how quickly they start acting like they already own it. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 67 years old, and for most of my life, I believe family was the one thing you never kept score with. If someone needed help, you helped. If someone was struggling, you stepped in. That was how I was raised, and for decades, it was how I lived. I worked hard for everything I had. Nothing was handed to me. My late husband and I spent more than 40 years building a comfortable life together. We paid our mortgage on time, saved carefully, skipped expensive vacations when money was tight, and made decisions that weren't always fun but kept us secure. After he passed away 8 years ago, I continued managing everything on my own. It wasn't easy, but I learned something important during those years. Independence is worth more than almost anything. By the time this story began, I was financially stable. Not wealthy enough to buy luxury homes or retire on a yacht somewhere in Florida, but comfortable. Comfortable enough that I could help others if I chose to. My mother, Evelyn Hayes, was 88 years old and still living in the same aging house she had owned for decades. The house wasn't unsafe, but it needed repairs, and stairs had become difficult for her. My sister, Carol Bennett, lived about 30 miles away. Carol was 64, and despite spending most of her life talking about opportunities, she always seemed to be waiting for someone else to create them for her. We had very different approaches to life. I planned. Carol hoped. I saved. Carol spent. Still, she was my sister, and I never wanted to judge her too harshly. For years, I tried to believe that family relationships mattered more than financial choices. One afternoon, after visiting my mother, an idea came to me. There was a small single-story home available only 10 minutes from where I lived. It had 2 bedrooms, a modest yard, wide hallways, and no stairs. The neighborhood was quiet, the grocery store was less than 2 miles away, and a medical clinic sat just down the road. As soon as I saw it, I thought about Mom. I imagined her living somewhere safer and easier to manage. I imagined being close enough to help whenever she needed something. The more I thought about it, the more the idea made sense. I even considered letting Carol stay there as well if she contributed to the day-to-day responsibilities. It felt like a practical solution for everyone. Over the next few weeks, I spoke with a real estate agent, reviewed the numbers, and realized I could make it work. I would purchase the property myself. I would cover the down payment. I would handle the closing costs. I would take responsibility for the entire investment. No loans from relatives. No shared ownership. Just me helping my family because I wanted to. When I finally told Mom and Carol about my idea, their reaction seemed positive. Mom became emotional and thanked me repeatedly. Carol smiled so much I thought she might actually cry. For a brief moment, I felt genuinely happy. I believed I was doing something meaningful. I believed the family appreciated the sacrifice involved. Looking back now, I realized that was the last peaceful moment before everything changed. Because only a few days later, a simple conversation around Mom's kitchen table would reveal an expectation so shocking that it completely transformed how I saw both of them. And by the end of that conversation, the house I planned to buy would already be disappearing. A few days after that first conversation, I drove over to my mother's house on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The weather was pleasant, and for most of the drive I found myself thinking about paint colors, furniture placement, and whether the little house would need new kitchen appliances. I was already mentally preparing for closing costs and moving expenses. In my mind, everything was moving forward exactly as planned. When I arrived, Carol's car was already parked in the driveway. That was not unusual. She visited Mom several times a week. I walked inside carrying a bakery box with fresh cinnamon rolls from a local shop. The atmosphere seemed relaxed. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, and Carol was pouring coffee. For the first few minutes, everything felt normal. We talked about the house. Mom asked questions about the neighborhood. Carol asked how large the bedrooms were. I answered politely, still believing we were discussing a gift that I was voluntarily providing. Then something shifted. It happened so casually that at first I almost missed it. Mom stirred her coffee and said, "When you finish the paperwork, make sure Carol's name is on the deed too." I looked up. I honestly thought I had misunderstood her. "What do you mean?" I asked. Mom looked surprised that I was even questioning it. "The house," she said. "Put both names on it. Yours and Carol's." For a second, nobody spoke. I waited for someone to laugh and explain that it was a joke. Nobody did. Carol sat quietly, staring into her coffee cup as though this conversation had already been settled long ago. Why would I do that? I finally asked. My voice was calm, but inside I felt completely confused. Mom frowned. Because it is family. That answer made even less sense. I explained that I would be paying the entire down payment. I would be covering the mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and repairs. Carol would not be contributing financially. I expected that simple explanation to end the discussion. Instead, Mom exchanged a glance with Carol before speaking again. "That should not matter," she said. "You have more than enough." I remember those words clearly because something about them immediately bothered me. Not because of the money itself, but because of the assumption behind them. It was no longer being discussed as my decision. It was being discussed as though my resources belonged to everyone else. Carol finally spoke. "It would just make things fair." Fair. That word landed harder than I expected. Fair to whom? I had spent decades working, saving, and planning. Carol had made her own choices over the years. Different choices. Yet somehow fairness now meant sharing ownership of something she had not invested in. I tried to stay reasonable. I explained that she would still benefit from the arrangement. Mom would have a comfortable place to live. Carol could help care for her. Everyone would gain something. But ownership was a completely different matter. Instead of understanding, both of them became noticeably colder. Mom crossed her arms. "You always make everything about money." That accusation stunned me. I was offering to purchase an entire house for their benefit, and somehow I was the one being accused of caring too much about money. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but the tone never recovered. Every explanation I gave was treated like selfishness. Every concern I raised was dismissed. By the time I left, I felt emotionally exhausted. As I walked to my car, Carol followed me outside. I expected her to smooth things over. Instead, she smiled slightly and said, "You should think about it. It is the right thing to do." During the drive home, I could not stop replaying those words. For the first time, the house no longer felt like a generous gift. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely, and deep down, I had the uncomfortable feeling that this conversation was only the first step in a much larger campaign to pressure me into giving away more than I ever intended. Over the next week, I learned something that took me far too long to recognize. Some people do not ask once and accept the answer. Instead, they keep asking until they wear down your resistance. At first, the pressure was subtle. My mother called me the next morning and acted as though our disagreement had never happened. She talked about the weather, a doctor appointment she had scheduled, and a television program she had watched the night before. Then, just before ending the call, she casually slipped it in. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" I knew exactly what she meant. I told her my position had not changed. The deed would remain in my name if I purchased the property. There was a brief silence before she sighed heavily. "I just wish you cared more about family." The line went quiet after that. 2 days later, Carol called. Unlike Mom, she did not pretend to be discussing something else. She went straight to the point. She told me she could not understand why I was being so protective of ownership. She said that if my intentions were truly generous, adding her name should not matter. I asked a simple question. Would you be contributing to the purchase? Her answer was immediate. That is not the issue. Of course it was the issue. It was the entire issue. Yet somehow every conversation seemed designed to avoid that basic fact. By the weekend, the situation became even stranger. I started receiving calls from relatives I had not spoken to in months. One cousin asked whether everything was all right between me and Carol. An aunt called and said she hoped I was not letting money come between family members. Another relative suggested that life was too short to argue over property. I sat in my living room staring at my phone after that conversation, completely stunned. How did they even know about this? I had told nobody. The answer became obvious. Carol and Mom had been talking. Not just talking, but recruiting. They were presenting their version of events to anyone willing to listen. And somehow, in their version, I was the difficult one, the selfish one, the unreasonable one. What hurt most was not the criticism itself. It was realizing how quickly people accepted a story without asking questions. Nobody seemed interested in who was paying for the house. Nobody asked who would carry the financial responsibility. Nobody asked why shared ownership was suddenly being demanded. Instead, they focused entirely on the emotional argument that families should share everything. One evening, I attended a small family dinner at a local restaurant. I almost canceled. but I did not want to create more drama. Within 15 minutes of sitting down, the topic surfaced again. A distant cousin smiled and said, "I heard you are helping your mother. That is wonderful." I thanked him politely. Then he added, "It is nice that Carol will have some security too." The comment caught me completely off guard. I asked what he meant. He looked confused. "The house. I heard both of you would own it." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. They were not discussing a possibility anymore. They were discussing it as a certainty. Somewhere along the way, Carol and Mom had stopped treating shared ownership as a request and started treating it as an outcome. As I drove home that night, a deeply uncomfortable thought settled into my mind. The pressure was not happening because they hoped I would agree. The pressure was happening because they already believed they were entitled to what I was offering, and entitlement has a way of growing stronger every time it goes unchallenged. About a week after that family dinner, I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed with them, but because I was beginning to realize that logic was accomplishing nothing. Every conversation followed the same pattern. I explained the facts, and they responded with emotion. I talked about responsibility, and they talked about fairness. I talked about ownership, and they talked about family. It felt like we were speaking entirely different languages. During that time, I continued moving forward with my research on the property. The house was still available. My real estate agent occasionally sent updates and asked whether I was ready to make an offer. Each time, I told her I needed a little more time. Something did not feel right anymore. I could not explain it fully, but a small voice in the back of my mind kept telling me to slow down. Then one Saturday afternoon, that voice turned out to be right. I had stopped by Mom's house unexpectedly to drop off some groceries. Nothing unusual. I had done the same thing hundreds of times over the years. When I arrived, Carol's car was parked outside. I carried the bags to the front door and let myself in. The house was quiet. I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Before I walked in, I heard my name. Normally, I would have announced myself immediately, but something about the conversation made me pause. "Margaret worries too much," Carol was saying. "Once everything is finalized, she will calm down." Mom laughed softly. "She always does." I stood frozen in the hallway. Neither of them knew I was there. Carol continued speaking. "Honestly, once my name is on the paperwork, it will not matter anyway." My stomach tightened. I stayed completely still. "Exactly," Mom replied. "Then nobody can change anything." There was a brief pause before Carol said something that I will never forget. "I have already been looking at ideas for renovations. The second bedroom could become an office. And if property values keep rising, who knows? Maybe I will sell my share in a few years." Sell her share. Her share. The words echoed in my head. The house had not even been purchased yet. No deed existed. No paperwork had been signed. Yet they were already discussing future profits from a property they had never contributed a dollar toward. Suddenly, every conversation from the previous weeks made sense. The phone calls, the pressure, the relatives repeating the same talking points. None of it had been about helping Mom. None of it had been about security. They were planning ownership. They were planning benefits. They were planning around an asset they already considered partially theirs. I quietly stepped back outside before they realized I had arrived. I left the groceries in my car and drove away. I needed time to think. For nearly an hour, I sat alone at a small park overlooking a lake about 15 miles from town. Families walked along the paths. Children fed ducks near the shoreline. Everything around me seemed peaceful, but inside my head, years of memories were rearranging themselves. I started remembering every time Carol had expected someone else to solve a problem. Every time Mom had pressured me to give a little more because I was the responsible one. Every time I had convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than setting boundaries. For the first time, I stopped viewing the situation as a disagreement. It was something else entirely. They were not asking for help. They were treating my help as an obligation. And once I understood that difference, I knew I could no longer move forward until I understood exactly what putting another person on that deed would really mean. The following Monday, I scheduled a meeting with a real estate attorney. It was not because I had already made a decision. At least that is what I told myself. The truth was that I needed facts. For weeks, every discussion had been driven by emotion, pressure, and guilt. I wanted someone with no connection to my family to explain exactly what would happen if I added Carol's name to the deed. The attorney's office was located in a professional building about 20 minutes from my home. He was a calm man in his 60s who had spent decades handling property transactions. After exchanging introductions, I explained the situation in simple terms. I told him I planned to purchase a home using my own money. I explained that a family member wanted her name added to the deed despite contributing nothing financially. Then I asked a straightforward question. What happens if I agree? The attorney leaned back in his chair and began explaining. The first thing he told me was that ownership and responsibility were not the same thing. If I purchased the property and voluntarily added Carol to the deed, she would immediately gain legal ownership rights. It would not matter that she had not paid for the house. It would not matter that I provided the down payment. It would not matter that I covered every expense. Ownership rights would still exist. Then he explained something even more concerning. If disagreements arose in the future, major decisions could become complicated. Selling the property, transferring ownership, refinancing, or making certain financial decisions could require cooperation from both owners. In some situations, disputes could even lead to expensive legal proceedings. As he continued talking, I felt increasingly uncomfortable. Every scenario he described sounded remarkably similar to the assumptions Carol had already been making. I told him about the conversation I overheard. I explained how she had been discussing renovations and future profits before the property even existed. He nodded slowly. That should tell you something important, he said. People often reveal their expectations long before paperwork is signed. That sentence stayed with me. Expectations, not gratitude, not appreciation. Expectations. He then asked a question nobody in my family had asked. What do you want from this arrangement? I sat quietly for a moment. The answer was simple. I wanted my mother to have a safe place to live. That was it. I was not trying to create an investment partnership. I was not trying to distribute wealth. I was not creating a family business venture. I was trying to help an elderly parent. The attorney smiled slightly and said, then structure your decision around that goal, not around other people's demands. When the meeting ended, I walked back to my car feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not because the situation had improved, but because I finally understood it clearly. The pressure campaign had made me question myself. The constant criticism had made me wonder whether I was being unreasonable. Now I knew I was not. More importantly, I realized something that changed my entire perspective. Carol and Mom had been treating the deed as a symbol of trust and fairness. Legally, it was neither. It was ownership. Real ownership with real consequences. As I drove home that afternoon, I no longer felt confused. For the first time since this situation began, I could see the road ahead clearly. And once clarity arrives, decisions become much easier to make. For the next several days, I did something that would have seemed impossible to the younger version of myself. I stopped responding immediately. When Mom called, I let the phone ring before returning the call later. When Carol sent messages, I read them without feeling obligated to answer right away. The distance was not meant to punish anyone. I simply needed enough quiet to hear my own thoughts again. For weeks, their voices had been louder than mine. Every conversation had focused on what they wanted, what they felt, and what they believed I should do. Somewhere in the middle of all that noise, I had almost forgotten to ask myself a simple question. What did I actually want? One evening, I sat alone on my back patio with a cup of tea and a notebook. The sun was beginning to set, and the neighborhood was peaceful. I started writing down every reason I had considered buying the house. The first reason was Mom. I genuinely wanted her to be comfortable. The second reason was convenience. Living closer would make it easier to help her as she got older. The third reason was family. I believed helping family mattered. Then I wrote down everything that had happened since sharing the idea. The demands, the pressure, the assumptions, the phone, calls from relatives, the conversation I overheard. By the time I finished, I noticed something that startled me. Not a single item on the second list reflected gratitude. Every item reflected expectation. That realization stayed with me for days. Meanwhile, the pressure continued. Mom called one afternoon and asked whether I had made progress on the house. I told her I was still evaluating my options. She sounded disappointed. Then she asked whether I had reconsidered the ownership issue. I calmly said no. Her tone immediately changed. I just do not understand why you are making this so difficult. I almost laughed. Difficult. The irony was remarkable. I was the only person involved who was willing to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet somehow, I was the obstacle. After we ended the call, I sat quietly in my kitchen and thought about those words. The more I reflected on them, the clearer everything became. They were not trying to understand my position. They were trying to change it. Understanding had never been the goal. Compliance was. A few days later, Carol left a voicemail. Her message sounded cheerful, but every sentence carried the same underlying assumption. She talked about furniture. She mentioned a nearby shopping center close to the neighborhood where the house was located. She even commented that the property would probably increase in value over time. Listening to her, I felt strangely calm. A month earlier, those comments would have frustrated me. Now they simply confirmed what I already knew. Carol was emotionally invested in an outcome that did not belong to her. That evening, I opened the folder containing all the information about the property. I reviewed the photographs, financial estimates, inspection notes, and projected expenses one final time. Then I closed the folder and placed it on the dining room table. I sat there for a long time staring at it. There was no anger in my decision, no dramatic moment, no emotional speech, just clarity, the kind that arrives when every excuse has been stripped away. By the time I went to bed that night, I had made up my mind completely. The next step would be simple. It would also change everything. The next morning, I woke up with the same certainty I had gone to bed with the night before. There was no hesitation left, no confusion, no need for another conversation. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and looked once more at the folder containing everything related to the house. Then I picked up the phone and called my real estate agent. She answered cheerfully and asked whether I was finally ready to move forward. "Actually," I said, "I am calling to let you know I will not be making an offer." There was a brief pause. She sounded surprised but professional. She asked whether there was a problem with the property. I told her the house was lovely. The problem had nothing to do with the house. After we ended the call, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not disappointment. Not regret. Relief. For weeks, I had been carrying the weight of a decision that no longer felt right. The moment I stepped away from it, the pressure disappeared. Later that afternoon, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. After a few minutes of small talk, I told her I had made a decision regarding the house. "Good," she said immediately. "I was wondering when you were finally going to come around." Her confidence almost made me smile. She still believed the discussion was about ownership. She still thought there would be a house. "There is not going to be a purchase," I said calmly. Silence filled the line. For several seconds, she did not respond. Then she asked me to repeat myself. I did. Slowly, clearly. "I am not buying the house." The change in her voice was immediate. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Why would you do that?" I answered honestly. "Because the situation stopped being about helping and started being about entitlement." She rejected that explanation immediately. She insisted I was overreacting. She said I was punishing everyone over a simple request. I listened without interrupting. When she finally paused, I replied with a sentence I had spent weeks arriving at. "If I am not comfortable with the conditions being demanded, then I am free to withdraw the offer completely." She did not like that answer. Not at all. The call ended shortly afterward. Less than 15 minutes later, Carol called. Then she called again. Then she sent messages. Then more messages. When I finally answered, she sounded shocked. Not sad. Not disappointed. Shocked. As though something impossible had happened. "You cannot be serious," she said. "You are throwing everything away." I found that statement interesting because it revealed exactly how she viewed the situation. She believed something was being taken from her, yet nothing had ever belonged to her in the first place. I calmly explained that no agreement had existed. No property had been purchased. No promises had been signed. I had simply chosen not to proceed. Carol became increasingly frustrated. She argued that everyone had been counting on this plan. I responded with a simple question. Did anyone ever ask what I needed? The silence that followed was answer enough. By the end of that day, the dream they had been building for themselves had vanished completely. And for the first time since this entire situation began, I felt absolutely at peace with my decision. What happened over the next several days was both predictable and revealing. The moment the possibility of free ownership disappeared, the reactions intensified. My phone became unusually busy. Calls came from relatives who had shown little interest in my life for years. Messages arrived from family members who suddenly felt compelled to share their opinions. The common theme was remarkably consistent. Everyone wanted to explain why I should have continued with the plan. Very few wanted to discuss why the plan had collapsed in the first place. One afternoon, my aunt called and told me she was disappointed. She said families should support one another. I agreed. Then I asked whether she knew that I had been expected to pay for the entire property while giving away ownership rights. There was a long silence. Finally, she admitted that she had not heard that part of the story. That conversation repeated itself several times with different relatives. Each time, I discovered that important details had somehow been left out when the situation was described to others. Nobody had been told that I would be carrying all the financial responsibility. Nobody had been told about the assumptions being made behind my back. Nobody had been told that Carol was already discussing future profits from a property she had never contributed toward. Slowly, I realized something important. The pressure campaign had only worked because people were hearing half the story. Meanwhile, Mom and Carol became increasingly frustrated. Mom accused me of embarrassing the family. Carol insisted that I had overreacted to a simple request. What fascinated me was that neither of them seemed willing to acknowledge the obvious. If it had truly been a simple request, they could have accepted my answer and moved on. Instead, they treated my refusal as a personal betrayal. One evening, Carol arrived at my house unannounced. She stood on my front porch and asked whether we could talk. I invited her inside because despite everything, she was still my sister. We sat at the kitchen table where countless family conversations had taken place over the years. For a moment, I hoped we might finally have an honest discussion. Instead, she immediately returned to the same argument. She talked about fairness. She talked about trust. She talked about family unity. Finally, I interrupted her. Carol, if you were buying the house, would you put my name on the deed? The question stopped her cold. She stared at me for several seconds before looking away. Then she quietly said, "That is different." I nodded. Exactly. For the first time during the entire conversation, neither of us spoke. The silence carried more truth than any argument ever could. Deep down, both of us understood the reality of the situation. She would never have agreed to the arrangement she expected from me. After she left, I felt a sense of closure beginning to settle in. Not because anyone had apologized. Nobody did. Not because anyone admitted they were wrong. Nobody did that either. The closure came from understanding that I no longer needed their approval. For weeks, I had been trying to justify a perfectly reasonable boundary. Now I realized boundaries do not require unanimous agreement. They simply require consistency. The chaos surrounding the canceled plan gradually revealed something valuable. The people who genuinely cared about me respected my decision, even if they wished the outcome had been different. The people who cared only about the benefits were the ones who remained angry. And once I recognized that distinction, the entire situation became much easier to understand. Several months passed after everything settled down. The constant phone calls gradually stopped. The emotional arguments faded. The relatives who had once rushed to offer opinions found other topics to discuss. Life became quiet again, and that quiet turned out to be one of the greatest gifts I could have received. For the first time in a long while, I was making decisions based entirely on what felt right for me instead of what kept everyone else comfortable. The money I had originally planned to spend remained exactly where it belonged. In my accounts, under my control, protected by the same discipline that had allowed me to build financial security in the first place. At first, I did not know what I wanted to do with it. For years, my focus had always been on solving other people's problems. Now there was no crisis to manage and no expectations to meet. There was simply freedom. That summer, I took a trip to Maine, something I had wanted to do for years. I spent several days exploring small coastal towns, walking along the waterfront, visiting local shops, and enjoying fresh seafood while watching fishing boats return to the harbor. It was not extravagant. It was not luxurious, but it was peaceful. More importantly, every choice was my own. During those quiet mornings overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Surprisingly, I no longer felt angry. Anger requires energy, and I had no interest in carrying that burden. Instead, I felt grateful for the lesson. If the house purchase had gone forward under the conditions they demanded, the problems would not have ended. They would have multiplied. Future disagreements would have been inevitable. Resentment would have grown. Relationships would have become even more strained. By stepping away early, I had avoided years of unnecessary conflict. My relationship with Mom eventually stabilized, although it never returned completely to what it had been before. Something fundamental had changed. I no longer accepted guilt as a substitute for respect. When she tried to pressure me about decisions, I calmly held my ground. Over time, She began realizing that those old tactics no longer worked. Carol remained distant for quite a while. I think she struggled with the fact that the outcome she expected never materialized. Yet, even that distance taught me something valuable. Healthy relationships survive boundaries. Relationships based primarily on benefits often do not. Eventually, communication resumed, but it was different, more cautious, more realistic. Most importantly, there were no more discussions about ownership, property, or what I supposedly owed other people. Looking back now, I realized the situation was never really about a house. The house was simply the thing that exposed a deeper problem. It revealed assumptions that had been quietly growing for years. It revealed expectations disguised as family loyalty. It revealed how easily generosity can be mistaken for obligation when boundaries are unclear. If there is one lesson I carry with me today, it is this: helping people is a choice, not a duty imposed by guilt. Kindness should come from willingness, not pressure. Support should be appreciated, not demanded. And the moment someone starts treating your generosity as something they are entitled to receive, the entire relationship changes. I still believe family matters. I still believe in helping when I can. But now I understand something my younger self never fully grasped. Protecting your peace is not selfish. Maintaining boundaries is not cruel. And sometimes the strongest decision you can make is simply refusing to give away control of the life you spent decades building.